Good afternoon. So, like the previous speakers before, I wish we could hear all your stories, and it's not practical, but hopefully during the break in the session, we'll have an opportunity to hear about your stories, and over the years that you would be here, or months, we'll have a chance to even work with you. So welcome. So I've been asked to share a little bit of my personal story, and let me try to be brief, but just give you some key points. I'm a product of public school. I'm a first-generation immigrant from the Caribbean. I was born in Jamaica, and my parents emigrated to New York, Queens, in the 70s. I went to Bayside High School, nice public school, great teachers, and ended up as an undergraduate at Princeton. Way beyond my dream. 1 year tuition at Princeton was more than the mortgage on my house that my father was paying. A fiscally reckless, potentially, on the face of it, decision to go. But truly, if you're going to go in debt, education's the reason to be in debt. Forget the car, the fancy clothes. Education debt's good debt. Still.
It is.
From the expert.
There's two kinds
So
of
anyway, at Princeton, I lucked out. First, you're in an environment like Harvard, rich with intellectual athletes. Rich with the intellectual athletes are your peers, the students sitting next to you in the classroom, and the teachers in the front of the room. I fell in love with an intellectual athlete, Eric Wieshaus, in his second year as an assistant professor. And little did I know that my work in his lab would lead to him getting the Nobel Prize. He thanks me every day. No, seriously, I saw this brilliant person in front of the class doing his thing, and all I wanted to do was be in his lab for my whole time at Princeton. And I think that same magic happens here every day at Harvard as well, because you're surrounded by intellectual athletes sitting next to you in the class and in front of you in the classroom. And that's really the bottom line about being in a place, an elite school like Harvard. After Princeton, I decided I loved developmental genetics, but it didn't bring to the population sciences. And I couldn't explain to people in Queens why I would spend all my life looking at Drosophila genetics. So I decided to go out in the world and search for what I would want to do, because I knew I couldn't do mammalian biology because I'd faint at the sight of blood. I knew I couldn't do law because, well, I didn't like law. And so I had to go find something, and I ran into someone called an epidemiologist who was Harvard trained and teaching at Tufts University. And in a lot of ways, when people ask me how I ended up at Harvard, I think Harvard found me. In the afternoon that I was searching for what I would want to do with the rest of my life, that was some biological but some social justice, a Harvard trained epidemiologist found me walking around the campus and took the time to talk to me and help me understand how to pronounce the word epidemiology and then how to conceptualize how I could combine biology and math and social justice into a career. So I like to think that I fell in love with science at Princeton. I discovered epidemiology at Harvard, and I also learned to become a scholar and a scientist at Harvard. And I'm back here after finishing my doctoral degree here in '91. I went to Seattle and worked there for 20 years. And the lessons learned at Harvard really helped launch me into a 20-year wonderful career in Seattle, where I was able to take lessons learned from my colleagues in the classroom, my teachers in the classroom, my teachers out in the field. One of the first things I did as a graduate student here was to identify individuals who shared my interest in global health. We weren't calling it global health back then. It was international health, and it was kind of marginal. And I would go out in the field and I would work on USAID projects that Harvard faculty led in remote corners of the world, and learned what it meant to be a scholar from an embarrassingly rich, resource-rich setting, to be an activist and scientist in really resource-poor settings. And bridging those two worlds were really important for my development as a person and also a scholar. I should tell you a little bit about the challenges and the opportunities. I think our first speaker said it. For me, it's kind of like wanting a drink of water, but having only a full blast fire hydrant open. And if you've grown up in New York, you know what that's like, right? You'll get wet, but it's a good wet. You will be challenged to prioritize and to be efficient and to think about how you can do all the things you want to do and stage them. I remember wanting to work with Ralph Paffenbarger on physical activity, but I was really wanting to be deeply embedded in my training in reproductive endocrinology. So I did the reproductive endocrinology, and when the time was right, I went back to the lessons learned and to my old professor, Ralph Paffenbarger, and learned the thing that I needed to learn from him. I would say that just yesterday, I received an email from one of Ralph Paffenbarger's students, who's now my colleague, whose student, her student, 3 generations removed from the primary professor, received an award in his name. 3 generations of teaching excellence, research excellence, and I remember being trained by him and the current mentor being my classmate, and now the student is a student in my department that I lead. One of the things I'll just say in closing about being at Harvard is I remember professors, more than one, telling us we have to be good to our students because one day you'll be our bosses. Well, I am the boss of several of my former professors as chair of the Department of Epidemiology, and that level of excellence and standard and understanding the value of investing in students is something I think that is really makes Harvard extraordinary. Its people and its students and its professors understanding their obligation is to be preparing those who will replace us. Thanks.